Thank you. Welcome today, everybody, to this session. This is California HCD's Coordinated Entry Cohort Group 1 session on the overview of coordinated entry. My name is Chris Pitcher from ICF. I'll be moderating today's session. We're going to jump right in and hand it off to our presenters. So I'll hand it to Mindy Mitchell. Wow, that was weird. Take it away, Mindy.
Well, thank you, Chris. Something different than your name. I think we need to move to the second slide now. Actually, go one more. Yeah, we covered this. Sorry, you guys. Okay, so welcome everybody. I assume that we saw a bunch of you on the office hours last week, and we are so excited to get this training cohort started. This is the fundamentals of coordinated entry. If you were looking for the advanced class, that is happening in 6 weeks. And now we are kicking off the cohort for kind of coordinated entry 101. I'm Mindy Mitchell from home base. I am joined today by my colleague, Christiana Osawe. And we want to know, because we have such a short time with you to get things kicked off, we're going to move this activity into the chat. So we will be monitoring the chat. And what we want to know is, who are you, what organization you're with, where you're located, the COC that you're in California, and what your role is in the coordinated entry system there. And really importantly, for the activity purposes and not just the introduction purposes, what is your definition of a coordinated entry system? You can be as expansive as you want to. You can just hit the highlights about like what are the elements of a coordinated entry system. What does that include? We want to get a sense of what it means to you all, especially since this is a foundational course, so that we can have a better idea of the things that we need to focus on moving forward. Today, we'll talk about it in the agenda, what we're going to cover today, but it's really important for us getting started just to figure out where everybody kind of is about coordinated entry in general. So thanks, folks, for putting your introductions in the chat. Please go back in and tell me what your definition of coordinated entry is. And Christiana, you can go ahead and introduce yourself too, while we are getting everyone's comments in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Mindy. So good afternoon, morning, everyone, depending on wherever it is that you are today. It should be afternoon for everyone, right? I believe it's afternoon. So my name is Christiana Osawe. I work for ICF. I came to ICF from a COC in New Jersey, where I worked for quite some time. I worked extensively in coordinated entry, so this is my jam. You will get to hear me nerd out quite a bit on these sessions, and super excited to be here with you guys. And so also, I give this as a preface to everybody in every session. I'm from Jersey. We say hummus. This is what we do. If for whatever reason that comes out, I'm really talking about what the rest of the world calls HMIS, but feel free if you feel like it just rolls off the tongue.
Except for, as we'll keep talking about, Mobile, Alabama, where we did call it hummus too, until I got out of Mobile, Alabama, and now I'm an HMIS girl, but I know what hummus means. Thank you, Christiana. Okay, seeing some chats come in. Thank you, Jewel, for your coordinated entry definition: a system or process for allocating the limited housing and homelessness resources to those that are most vulnerable through a prioritization process. I think Jewel is hitting all of the elements there. Other folks, what's coordinated entry mean to you? Your definition of coordinated entry? And if you don't want to give us a definition of coordinated entry, that's fine. Just at least let us know who's here and the agency that you're with and your location. Thank you, Charles. A process to ensure that all people experiencing a housing crisis have fair access to services. Stephanie, an organized system that prioritizes the most vulnerable and provides fair access. Yes. Philippe, service providers working together to ensure coverage for the most vulnerable members of the community. Love it. Love it. Sheila, a system that regulates, distributes referrals to services and programs. Great job, you guys. Keep it going. Okay. And Kristen, if you'll go ahead and get on with the next slide, because I know we want to make sure that we get through everything. So again, you guys, welcome. This is our first session for this Fundamentals of Coordinated Entry training cohort. We will be meeting every week at this time. And today's is really going to be kind of an introduction and overview of the cohort itself. We are going to talk about, again, like we did on office hours, the purpose of coordinated entry. And we'll touch on the actual HUD definition of coordinated entry. And it's great to see that so many of you really do understand the concept. And for those of you who don't, and for whom this is brand new, no worries. That is what this training series is for. Thank you, Jackie. Really, really great input. And Jackie is an expert on a lot of things related to homelessness. So super glad to have her here today. Also, she's Pickle's mom. We'll also talk about today and do an activity with you guys to get an idea about where you guys see effectiveness and challenges in coordinated entry. We're going to cover kind of those basic requirements of what every coordinated entry system has to have. We'll talk about the different phases of coordinated entry. And this is really as a way to kind of set us up for the 4 weeks of training and then 1 week of kind of wrapping it up that's to come, where we're going to dig deeper into those different phases of coordinated entry. We're really going to shoot for having some time for kind of Q&A and discussion with you guys, and then talk about next steps. So next slide. Okay. So on this one, as you guys know, this cohort is just the basics, kind of an outline of an overview of the purpose of coordinated entry within your larger homelessness response system. We really are hoping to kind of tailor this for smaller staffed COCs, COCs that are undergoing leadership transitions, folks who are just getting started doing work in the homelessness field. But we're also having this open to anybody who just wants to have a better understanding of coordinated entry. Sometimes a good way to do that is just to go back and revisit the basics. So that's what this will be. As we said, it's me, Mindy, and Christiana with you today. And you guys don't forget your duly elected queen of coordinated entry. It's Pickles, the coordinated entry cat. As others have done with Annie, the compliance chicken, Pickles is going to be on these presentations to remind you throughout your training cohorts about whatever topics or issues that we think are going to be worthy of paying some extra attention to. Okay, and next slide. And Christiana, I think you're up.
Awesome. All right, so we got some really good definitions in the chat around what coordinated entry is. And so like Mindy was saying, I think it's great that a lot of folks on here already have a good understanding of what it is that we're going to be covering, right? I heard a lot of good buzzwords like system, and I saw prioritizing, right? And allocating resources and catering to the most vulnerable and access. And I think all of those are great words that really do, in essence, describe what coordinated entry was intended to do, right? And so here's the big boss's definition, right? This is how HUD defines coordinated entry. And so they consider coordinated entry to be a centralized or coordinated process designed to coordinate program participant intake assessment and provision of referrals. A centralized or coordinated assessment system covers the geographical area, is easily accessed by individuals and families seeking housing or services, is well advertised, and it includes a comprehensive standardized tool. And so what we've linked here too, and you guys are going to get these slides, is the actual notice that comes in. I worked in coordinated entry for nearly 6 years, and I don't think I found out that there was an actual written notice about coordinated entry until year like 4, to be honest. And so it's always helpful to just go back to what the regs say, right? And to just make sure that whatever it is that we're aligning kind of fits within what was described in there. We can go to the next slide. I think the beauty about coordinated entry and just the way that it has been created, it really is a system, right? It's a system created to organize, right? It's and so because of that, there's room for it to be there's room for creativity, there's room for nuance, right? There's room for different programs to kind of cater their coordinated entry systems, or different COCs to cater their coordinated entry program in relation to what is actually going on in their community, right? And so it's important for us to kind of just understand what coordinated entry was intended to do and why we do it anyways. And so back in the old days, coordinated entry was when, before it even existed, clients that were experiencing homelessness in communities were served at a first come, first served basis. And so essentially, individuals that knew somebody within the system, if let's say they knew the shelter staff person and they knew the housing coordinator from this agency and they knew this person and that person, they honestly were the ones that were getting served. And typically the individuals that were able to move around and kind of network, if you will, were some of the individuals that did not have as many barriers to entering the system as others, right? And so they had some kind of resources, perhaps, or just certain situations that enabled them to navigate the system. However, that wasn't necessarily equitable. It left out the most vulnerable and perhaps the people within the system experiencing homelessness that needed housing the most. And so pretty much it wasn't efficient. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't organized. The means by which clients entered and exited the system just wasn't being properly tracked, as we know now, with even just a lot of the ways that we have prioritized data collection and all of those standards within coordinated entry as well. A lot of those things just did not exist. And so systems were working to some extent, right? They were working to house folks that were that were experiencing homelessness, but they weren't necessarily sure if even the work that they were doing was efficient. And we can go on to the next slide now. And so here enters coordinated entry. And again, coordinated entry was developed with the intent to organize. And so the purpose of coordinated entry is to bring that work to the community level system. And so that way the most vulnerable that are experiencing homelessness within that system, that county, that region, that geographical area that has been prescribed are the ones that are being served. And so how many folks have heard about Housing First? If you can, drop in your definition of Housing First in the chat. All right, so I'll be looking, I think Chris is going to help us look out for some definitions of Housing First. So Housing First is also something that then began began to be central to a coordinated entry system. And so Housing First basically says that even if a person is not quote unquote housing ready, even if a person doesn't necessarily have certain things in place that should deem them housable, right? They ought to get housing first to move out of the homeless system. So let's say they're in a shelter and there's a housing opportunity available through coordinated entry now, they can go straight into housing rather than having to wait to become ready-made and presentable in order to enter into that housing program. And so coordinated entry was really intended to create a flow by which clients entered and exited the systems. And so, yes, there were bottlenecks. Yes, people ended up waiting on waiting lists. However, through an effective coordinated entry model, people could flow. And Kristen, I think we can move on to the next slide. All right. So coordinated entry is not perfect, as no system is. And so coordinated entry has some great strengths. But there are also some limitations of coordinated entry. And so once again, coordinated entry is a system designed to ensure equitable access to housing resources. So everyone that has worked in this field long enough knows that resources are scarce, right? There is a certain amount of housing available in everyone's community. And so you're really trying to make sure that individuals that need housing are getting into housing. And unfortunately, one of the limitations of coordinated entry is that it does not create housing resources, but it really is a way for you to deploy your housing resources in the best way possible. It's a system that is created to streamline referrals and cross-agency coordination. And so, for example, things like case conferencing can kind of help with that. Having those service provider level discussions as to who is going to get housed when a certain referral pops up. Some of those things are things that coordinated entry can help to systematize and streamline as well too. However, it doesn't end up being the end all, the end all be all solution to homelessness, right? And so what that means is that some of your individuals might get housed outside of coordinated entry, and that's okay. That's okay. However, your goal is to house as many folks as possible through your system, again, prioritizing those that are experiencing the highest levels of vulnerability for those housing resources that are available. And so considering that too, coordinated entry could be a way to facilitate some diversion discussions. Put in the chat if you know what diversion is, put some definitions in there for us. But diversion essentially is a means to actually divert or move people away from the homeless system using the resources that might already be available to them, right? And so let's say you're working with somebody that is on the coordinated entry prioritization list, but upon having those cross-agency coordination meetings, where you're talking about what resources are available and you're having that level of discussion, you realize, oh wait, this person actually has a neighbor somewhere that might be able to actually house them permanently. They have a guest house that they can turn into a 1-bedroom apartment or a studio apartment for them. So why don't we see if we can just connect them there? And so by having an organized system, it can help you even facilitate some of those discussions and get people to where they need to be. And one of the things that I used to say quite often when I worked within a coordinated entry system is just use what's available to you, right? And so in your community, for example, you may not have ample permanent supportive housing resources, but perhaps you guys have a really good rooming house model. Use that. Perhaps you guys have some really great relationships with some local property managers. Use that. Whatever it is that you have within your system that can get people to enter and exit efficiently, use it and try to see what you can do to move people as quickly as possible and efficiently as possible. And so coordinated entry also is not the full picture of your homeless response system. And so we'll talk a little bit about where diversion, for example, sits in the homeless response system as it relates to coordinated entry, right? But there's other systems that work with your homeless response system that aren't necessarily a part of coordinated entry, but work analogous to it to help your individuals move into housing. And so we can go on to the next slide now too. And I believe I will be throwing it to Mindy to facilitate our first activity.
Awesome. Thanks, Christiana. And Chris, I am going to put the Jamboard link into the chat. So everybody, click on that link I just put into the chat. Chris is going to share his screen and show you the Jamboard in real time. So this is what we want to know in this activity. Again, this is kind of a fundamental course on coordinated entry, but we think probably most of you are aware of coordinated entry in your system. And so give us some perspective. What's been one challenge about coordinated entry in your COC and one positive effect of coordinated entry in your COC? So as you can see here, this is how you do a Jamboard if you haven't. Over to the left, you'll see a sticky note. Click on that and it'll pop a sticky note up. Then you can just type in, you can change the colors of your sticky note. When you hit save, There's your sticky note. So if you cancel yours, then you can move your sticky note around and put it where you want to on the board there. So everybody just take just a minute and add one positive effect you've seen from coordinated entry in your COC and one challenge that you've had with coordinated entry in your COC. As Christiana talked about, there is no perfect system. And homelessness and housing resources are scarce. And so we do have to do this kind of thinking about how do we get scarce resources to the people who need them the most and do it in an efficient and effective way and make sure that we're doing it equitably. So there's always going to be some stuff we can improve, right? So talk about the challenges, but I want to see also some positive effects that we've seen coordinated entry have. Think about, for those of you who have been doing it a while, what was it like in the bad old days before coordinated entry? I can add some thoughts here, and I think I shared some of those with you guys before too, but want to see that from you guys as well. And if anybody cannot figure out Jamboard, or you just don't care if you're anonymous or not, you can also add your perspective in the chat. One challenge in your COC with coordinated entry, one positive effect in your COC with coordinated entry. And because I am here with our runner-up, Hunter. Oh, hi. Live coordinated entry cat runner-up. Hunter is going to help me look at your Jamboard here, and I'm just going to share with folks who maybe aren't able to see the screen right now, challenges that have come up, and this is especially important in the California context, which you guys won't be surprised about. One person shared that there was not enough housing due to the wildfires. So very often, this is how we know if we have a healthy system, and sometimes where we need to make improvements in our system when those kind of not everyday occurrences like natural disasters happen, then we can kind of see where the stress points are and where we need to make improvements. So thank you for sharing that. The perception that someone has to be homeless enough to get into housing with coordinated entry. And we are going to talk about these challenges that come up for you guys over the course of this training cohort that come up in things like when we're thinking about who is eligible for which kind of housing and thinking about definitions of homelessness, definitions of chronic homelessness, and how we can make sure that everyone understands those in the context of coordinated entry. Someone added lack of resources in rural areas, really, really important. And thinking about how, especially for your COCs that have maybe one kind of larger city in the COC and then outlying county areas that are more rural, that's a whole coordinated entry system. But how are we doing things to make sure that folks who don't live in the central city area are getting equitable accesses to resources in coordinated entry? And I want to share some of the positive ones too. One person shared that we're able to communicate with clients quickly. More people are getting referred and housed. Having the ability to discuss clients and vote on continuing or declining services. I love this one. The extremely vulnerable people were able to get access to housing after many years of unsheltered homelessness. And I think this is one of the most important ones. And what Christiana talked about with those bad old days before coordinated entry, very often those people who most needed the most intensive resources, in this case PSH, that were available from the homelessness system were the people who were least likely to get into the homelessness system. And it wasn't anybody's like mean on purpose fault, but it was just a function of the way that there wasn't really a system approach to getting people housing. And when you're doing something on a first come, first serve basis, usually those folks who have the most barriers to stability aren't able to get there first, right? And sometimes that's very just purely due to the physical ability to not get there first. So coordinated entry has really been focused on trying to kind of flip that around and make sure that those folks who need it the most are the ones who are able to get the access to that really rich resource. Another person shared that a positive effect has been chronicity is shortening. Really love these perspectives, and we are going to keep this Jamboard going throughout this training cohort, and make sure that we are using all of your input to inform the trainings as we move forward over the next few weeks, especially. Chris, it looks like maybe the activity is kind of down on those. Okay. So we will go ahead and move back into the slides. Again, thank you, everyone. That Jamboard is ours, our little cohort group. Use it as much as you want and moving forward. But we will go ahead and talk a little bit more about as we move into what the content is going to be over the course of this cohort. So again, just to touch base from before, there are some basic CES requirements. What we'll talk about in a little while is there's a lot more that you can do with coordinated entry in a really sophisticated system and in a system where so many different pieces of the puzzle in our community are participating. It really can be something transformative. But just as a basics, it's about making the process of getting into resources, whether they be prevention, diversion, housing, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, right? Like other systems, it's streamlining that whole process and with an eye towards making it more fair and more equal in access, especially for those folks who didn't used to be able to get to the first come, first served front of the line. It's about standardizing kind of the tools that we use to assess whether someone, where they are on that needing to be in the most vulnerable list, and the practices that we're doing across the whole system. It's about, like Christiana talked about, using that housing first approach at the system level, like really making sure that our whole community is buying into the practice of housing first, but kind of also that philosophy about it. And then prioritizing those folks who are most in need. So I think it's really important too that it's not just about like we have to do this thing because HUD says we have to do this thing. This really gives you an opportunity to come together as a system, as that whole community, and think about how are our resources organized? How do we want to make sure that we're matching up the people who need this resource with the resources that we have available? How are we thinking about being more efficient, more effective in our resource distribution, and making sure that we're not perpetuating disparities based on geography or disability or race and ethnicity, right? Like all of that kind of stuff. It allows you to have this framework to come together as a community. And so hopefully as we think about it in those terms, it doesn't feel so much like, oh, we got to do this thing because HUD says we have to do this thing. However, next slide. HUD does say that you have to do this thing. So here we have another pickles alert because HUD says you have to do this thing, and maybe moving forward, you guys, this can be the pickles being HUD, Franken pickles. Nobody tell HUD that HUD is Franken pickles, but HUD is Franken pickles in this scenario. So HUD does say you have to do this thing. So you guys, you have to do this thing, right? Like you're getting COC resources, you're administering in a COC, you're running HMIS or HMIS in a COC, right? Like we all have to participate in this. The COCs are required to establish that coordinated entry system. And that was the notice that we posted earlier. There are very specific requirements that have to happen at the COC level around having policies and procedures around coordinated entry. Your HMIS HMIS system, right, has to do data reporting specifically related to coordinated entry. And then also at the grantee level. So if you are a housing project that is being funded with either COC or ESG resources, you are required to serve only clients that are referred through that coordinated entry system. So this is really important for you guys at the program level to understand as well. Other programs are either federal programs are either encouraged or required to participate in coordinated entry systems. So this might mean your emergency housing voucher programs. That was a special purpose voucher program that came about as a result of the additional COVID funding, and they were required to participate in coordinated entry. Some of you may be starting to work on the home ARP resources, and for communities that wanted to make sure that those resources were being targeted to different special populations, including people experiencing homelessness, that's going to require some kind of participation in the coordinated entry system. VA programs, SSVF, VASH, right? All of that is either required to or encouraged to by the federal government to participate in coordinated entry. And I would say it's a best practice to be a part of, like Christiana kept talking about, that system response to homelessness, even when it's not HUD COC homelessness resources, right? Like if you can get the whole community involved and it's part of that flow through the system, as many people as possible that we can get connected to non-HUD homelessness resources, then you know you have at the very end of it more efficient use of those resources. And of course, your programs are now being monitored on this as part of compliance. And another thing that I wanted to do here, we're not going to do an activity on this, but there's a really handy tool here, and we will explore this more as we go through the training cohort. There's a coordinated entry self-assessment tool that HUD and others have come up with for you guys to use at the community level. And what you'll see as we go through this next time is there are some things about coordinated entry that are required, and we need to know those. Yes, absolutely. There are other things that are recommended. And then there are other things that are kind of optional, but wow, they work really well at the community level if you can figure out as a community how to use them efficiently and effectively. So again, we'll use this. Today is just kind of touching base about all the things that we're going to explore more deeply, but that'll be a really great tool for us to use and for you to use in your community moving forward. Okay, Christiane, I think the next Jamboard activity is for you. I will put the Jamboard in the chat again. And Chris, we are going to let you screen share one more time. So you guys that are in the Jamboard, you'll see up at the top of your Jamboard, there are some little arrows. And if you click on the arrow to your right, that says next frame. And that will take you to the one that you see now. And what we want to do in this activity, Christiana, you want to go ahead with this? Chris is also going to show them the pins.
Sure. Okay. Sure. So we wanted to just introduce you to the coordinated entry core elements. Sometimes they're called phases, sometimes they're called components. So you might hear this. These four describe differently, but essentially it's again, that flow, right? The means by which clients enter and exit the system. So you have access, sometimes referred to also as system entry. You have the assessment, which is that standardized tool that HUD has required each community to use, which actually leads into your prioritization scheme. And then you have referral, which is how, again, clients exit the system and hopefully move into housing or some other stabilizing situation. And so the purpose of this activity is for us to really get a gauge as to where you sit within your coordinated entry system. And so for folks that might be the end all be all in their community, you might sit in all of these. And so you might be the person that when individuals come into your system, you are making sure that they are getting to the right access site. You might be the person that is filling out the assessment with them and sitting down to ask them the questions that might help get them to where they need to get to. You might be the one that is prioritizing them for housing and managing the by name list or the list from HIMIS, whichever way that your community does it. Or you might be the one that is referring them for housing, or you might be the housing project that they're being referred to. And so we really just want to get a sense of where you sit. And so again, like Mindy mentioned, there's a pen feature that Chris is demonstrating on the screen here. So pick a color and just put a dot that reflects which area you sit in. And this is going to be helpful for us to just get a gauge as to, again, where you guys work within coordinated entry. And then as soon as we're done here, we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about these phases and core elements, and just kind of present it a little bit. And we'll get to dive more into this too in future sessions too. So let's see what's coming in. And so you can put a dot in multiple sections, once again, if you sit in multiple seats. For example, in the agency that I worked in, I pretty much did everything but access. So if I were going to be the one sitting here, I was reviewing the assessments that came in, I was managing the by name list, I was referring for housing. We also had housing projects in the agency that I worked for. And so I also took in some clients in that area as well too. So yeah, definitely very, very curious to see how you guys have it set up. And as Mindy just mentioned, if you use the highlighter pen, it actually helps you make a bigger dot. All right, so this is going to be on and going. So thank you, Chris, for sharing this. We can go back to the slides now and just talk through it a little bit, but feel free to keep working on this, keep adding in your dots and telling us where you sit. All righty. And Kristen, we can go to the next slide beyond this one. Awesome. All right, so as we are moving through this cohort, we really want to spend some time to focus on each of the phases, again, sometimes called components, sometimes called core elements of coordinated entry. And so we're really going to be diving deep into those from session 3 to session 5. And so session 3 is going to be centered on system entry and access. And so when you think about system entry, when you think about access, you're really thinking about how clients experiencing a housing crisis learn that coordinated entry is even there, right? Do people in your community know that this is something that exists for them to utilize, for them to access, and for them to do they know that this is a means by which they might be able to solve their housing crisis? And so system entry really ensures that all people in your community that are experiencing some level of a housing crisis, namely homelessness, have equal access to all of the crisis response systems resources in the COC. And so this is, again, where we're talking about where coordinated entry sits in relation to the entire homeless response system, right? And so once again, coordinated entry is just one means. It really is for individuals that are experiencing what we call HUD homelessness, right? And so a client that might be, for example, couch surfing, they might be entering into the system, for example, through 211 or a call center or whatever other access sites or access points you guys might have. However, through that process, they might be diverted away from the shelter system. They might be diverted away from coordinated entry if they're not experiencing HUD homelessness. And so when we start talking about access is really for individuals that are in your community that are experiencing HUD homelessness and are entering in coordinated entry in that way. And so those are your individuals that are seeking housing or services by making contact with your homeless response system. And so again, it might be by them reaching out to 211. It might be an outreach worker that interacts with them. If they're in an unsheltered situation, for example, it might be a worker at a provider site that maybe is showing up to just talk about services. And one of the components of a robust coordinated entry system is that it's well marketed, so that way people can easily access your system. And so again, when we're going to dive deeper into this, but just this, we just wanted to provide a little bit of an overview of system entry and access. Are there any questions about that? Does that make sense? Just how coordinated entry is really taking in the individuals that are experiencing HUD homelessness, even though persons experiencing a housing crisis might also be entering your system as well too, or did that complicate things? Curious to know how that landed for you guys. All right, we can move on to the next slide. All right, so next in session 4 of the cohort, of this cohort, we're going to be talking about assessment and prioritization. And we'll also be talking about this in our second cohort in even further depth for our individuals that are in the process of redesigning their coordinated entry system and really want to work towards developing their own assessment tool and prioritization schema that fits within the needs of their COC. And so when you're thinking about assessment, I think one of the common misconceptions about the assessment is that it's a housing application, right? You sit down with a client, you're asking them all of these questions about their situation, and you're getting into the weeds of the crisis that they're experiencing. And it can be traumatic for them, right? And it can be daunting. However, they might leave there thinking that this is going to give them an immediate placement into housing, whereas it doesn't necessarily do that. And so why do we take the assessment anyway, right? Like, why do we actually gather information about the person experiencing homelessness situation if it's not going to directly lead into housing? Well, it really helps to lead into prioritization, right? And so once you know more details that speak to what the individual experiencing homelessness is experiencing, then you can consider how they might fit within your system. Through the assessment, you might realize, oh, we have a resource that even before even thinking about housing or before even thinking about referral, that might even benefit them here. Okay, let's make sure that they get that, right? And so really the assessment is to really evaluate that person's vulnerability and their barriers to housing, so that way they can be served in the best and most adequate way possible. And that leads directly into the prioritization schema. There's different forms of prioritization. And again, we'll get into the technicalities of that moving forward. There's dynamic prioritization, there's static prioritization. Dynamic prioritization is really the mode by which that most COCs operate in. And pretty much what that says is who is prioritized today for housing may change depending on who comes into your system. It may depend on what resources you have available. And so prioritization is really just the process by which you are analyzing that information that you obtained from the assessment to figure out how you can actually serve this person. Where do they fit within your pot, your pool of limited resources? And so again, prioritization is really one of the most important components, in my opinion, of coordinated entry, because it really is the thing that speaks directly to making sure that individuals that are most vulnerable and have the most need are getting access to resources efficiently, effectively, and and that they're being prioritized and placed first where they need to be. And so we can move on to the next one. All right. And so in week 5 of this cohort, we're going to be talking about matching, referral, and placement. And so really this is housing, right? What is the goal of any homeless response? It should be housing. It should be to house. What is the solution to homelessness? Okay, if you guys are off mute, I'm sure you're at your desk saying housing unanimously, right? The goal is to ensure that individuals that are experiencing homelessness are leaving our system and going into permanent housing. It's the reason why we've prioritized housing first, right? Because we don't want people sitting on a list years upon years upon years waiting for just to get into shelter, for example, right? Like, we want to make sure that they can get into something that is stable, that is permanent, and that is safe, and that really meets the need that they have, which for anyone experiencing homelessness is housing, right? And so matching is the process by which you take the resources that you have available in your community and you consider who's prioritized for housing, and you literally put it together and make a match. If you have this property, this unit available, and it has a list of eligibility requirements that say that this person has to have this need and that need and this and this makeup, and then you have persons on your prioritization list, you're then assessing your prioritization list and seeing who actually fits the resources that you have available. And that process is called matching. I think one of the one way that you might see matching playing out in real time is through case conferencing, right? And so you can have those systematics, those system level discussions with different partners and program participants and housing providers in regards to what is actually available and who might go where. The way I always used to say it is, I feel like coordinated entry is like the brain of the system, right? It's like the head. It's your logic. It's your data. It gives you the numbers. It gives you the scores. But case conferencing is like the heart of your system, and it allows you to really personalize those individuals and make sure that the housing opportunity that is available is going to the right person. And so what that means is that there might be, actually, you know what? I can go on this, so let me not get too much into the weeds. Join us in session 5 if you want to hear me talk housing. All right, so going on to referral. The referral is just the process by which individuals, again, that are matched and identified for that housing resource are then getting referred to it. And so in the referral phase, you might have something like a warm handoff taking place. One case manager is handing off that individual experiencing homelessness to the housing provider. They're doing possibly another assessment, right, to make sure that that this is an eligible match. And then hopefully the end result is placement into housing. And hopefully that client is eligible for the program, they get housed, and they no longer return. I used to always say, guys, this is the one time where we don't want to see them again. Once they get placed, once they get housed, we don't want them to come back. We don't want to reassess them. We don't want to reprioritize. We want them to stay there. And so part of even the job of whoever is working within the matching, referral, and placement portion of your coordinated entry system is to really ensure that the right match is being made, the right referral is being made, so that way the individual that is getting placed for housing is getting placed in a place that is stable, that is permanent, and that really fits their needs as well, too. And I believe we can move on. All right.
Yeah. Okay. You guys, that's the content for today. And we do have 10 minutes left on the calendar. Again, today's session was about just kind of introducing the cohort. Everything that Christiana just went over is what we're going to be covering moving forward. So we'll talk a little bit about that and next steps, and we even have an assignment for you guys to get started. But we also wanted to make sure that we had some time for Q&A from you guys, discussion. You guys can, I think we're a small enough group. Yeah, we're a small enough group. If you want to unmute and just share any thoughts or questions that you have, you can also use the chat. I see some folks are still going in the Jamboard, and I love that. Again, the pen we were using for kind of doing dots, but I did put a note in there that if you want to use the sticky note on that second slide, you're welcome to. We will continue to use this Jamboard moving forward. So this is kind of like our little documentation of our cohort and our training together and the way that we're capturing everything. We absolutely are friendly. Pickles may not be friendly when it's time for Franken Pickles and discussions of HUD, but until then, we're absolutely very friendly. So anybody have any questions from today's content? Okay.
Does anyone have any comments? One thing also too that we wanted to ensure is that you guys also had the opportunity to hear from one another, right? And so this session is really it's for you all, right, in the state of California. And so you guys know your COCs, you guys know your coordinated entry systems. And so if there was anything that you feel like we should flag or should have flagged, please also feel free to come off of mute and share that with the rest of the group as well too. Yes, we're talking from high level, but we also want to make it local, and that's where you guys come in to just provide the expertise on that.
Kristen, thanks, Angie. Thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to get to know you a little better on these. Kristen, can you go back to the slides? And to the next slide after this one. Okay, so we have an assignment for you, and it's not a big one, and I hope it will be something that you guys are already kind of thinking about just as part of the work that you do. We would love to hear from you all, and we will follow up with an email and a reminder. So your assignment this week, and we want to get feedback from you guys for this starting on our next session next week, is you all indicated kind of like which part of the coordinated entry system you're involved with. So we want to know about any ideas that you have about how you want to better engage or know more about a part of the system that you're not involved with. So what can you do this week to think about those 4 parts of the system, right? Which ones are you, let's see, Kristen, can you go back to slide 13? Okay, 13. Oh, the numbers may be off. Go one more. One more. Sorry. Oh, well, okay, I'm looking at the wrong one. It's the one that has the coordinated entry core elements. The other way. Sorry. There. Okay, so everybody, so we talked about access, assessment, prioritization, and referral. So for your assignment this week, pick one that you're not involved with and learn a little bit more about it, or think about things that you want to learn more about. And then for folks that are in smaller communities, maybe pick an area that you just don't know anything about, and what you want to learn more about that one. I think I kind of said the same thing, so sorry about that. The first one is, if you are not in a smaller system, think about ways that you can better engage in the work that you do with the other piece of the system. Does that make sense? Christiana, rescue me here, because I think I didn't say that correctly.
No, I think you were fine. So for example, like I mentioned, I worked on assessment, prioritization, and referral in the system that I came in, right? So I was least familiar with access. Every now and then, if our access person wasn't there, we call them the access navigator. If they weren't available, I might step in to do their calls for that day. But it really helped me learn coordinated entry from a different lens, because I'm speaking to people, whereas really on the assessment, prioritization, and referral side, I was really more into like the data and not really talking directly with the individuals that were experiencing homelessness within the system. And so by kind of stepping into that role a little bit, it gave me a better understanding of, oh, okay, so this is what kind of happens in this area. And so you don't necessarily have to go and do the person's job, right? But you can use this as an opportunity to maybe talk to the individual in your community that works in that area or that phase that maybe you're not familiar with, or figure out a way to maybe have a meeting, a coordinated entry meeting in your community, and say, hey guys, like, how can we do this better? Maybe, like just kind of figure out a way to better engage with all of those core elements in a way that makes the most sense to you guys based on what you know about your current system.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Michael, I just responded to that great question. What if we're involved in all pieces of the system? Absolutely, and especially in smaller places you are. So for ones like that, think about what is one area that you can improve on, and start thinking about how you might improve on that. So thank you, Christiana, for making that make more sense to me. For folks who didn't see it, I put in the chat. So thinking about how does one part of the system that you don't work in, learn a little bit more about how that works, and come back to the next session sharing kind of what you learned, or thinking about how can you possibly better engage from where you sit with that part of the system. If you're not in that kind of position within your system, if you're in a smaller system or you kind of do it all, what's one area of the system that you want to understand more about? And then again, like for folks like Michael that are kind of like, we do it all in here, what's one area that you can improve on? So again, we'll follow up with these prompts, and this will be kind of our introduction activity on the next session, where we begin to do our deep dives on the different phases of coordinated entry. Okay, Kristen, sorry for all that back and forth. If you can go to the next to the last slide. One more. Okay. So next week, we are starting with governance. And for those of you who don't think this is exciting, this actually is really, really exciting. This gets at the stuff that we talked about that actually is required from HUD. And this is how that behind the scenes sausage making of how we're building our system. So this is actually a really important piece of the puzzle. And we're starting here because this is where pickles will be all over. Franken pickles will be all over this one. And this will be a really important way that we're kind of laying the foundation for what building out that system looks like. Then the following week, February 20th, this is when we start to move into these different phases and really doing a deep dive there. So when we talk about access and system entry, we're going to be having those thoughtful conversations about what does that coverage look like? How are we ensuring that we're not perpetuating disparities with our coordinated entry system that we build? We'll do some talking about various racial equity tools that have been developed in different communities. We'll be thinking about how people are accessing and where they're accessing, what are our access points, and then how does prevention and diversion fit into our coordinated entry system, even if they're not part of that official coordinated entry piece further down the line where we're doing the matching to housing. So week 4, move into that next important phase, which is about the prioritization and assessment. We'll talk about how we're evaluating that, how we're making changes to that. What does a prioritization scheme look like? And we'll have that conversation about assessment tools. Like we talked about in the office hours, there's a lot of misunderstanding about assessment tools, some myths about which tools are required. No specific one is required. And hear from different communities about the assessment tools that they're using. And finally, we'll wrap it up with that most important piece, which is about getting folks into housing. Housed folks are not homeless, and that is the whole point of doing coordinated entry, is making sure that we're getting folks into the housing that they need and that they want to ensure that they don't become homeless again. So we'll talk about pathways, we'll talk about case conferencing. Really important piece of this puzzle is that landlord engagement piece. Then finally, we'll wrap up this cohort with our evaluation. We'll talk about continuous evaluation, continuous quality improvement, all of those things, helping you guys think about like moving forward with work plans for improving your coordinated entry systems, and just wrap it up with a general Q&A. Next slide.
All right. And so we are at time, but we are so grateful that you guys were able to join us today. This is, again, we really want this to be as interactive and meaningful for you as possible. So please do feel free to contact Mindy and myself beyond this. Our email is here. Again, please feel free if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if there's anything, again, central to your COC that has come up time and time again, and you just need maybe some thought partnership around it, some brainstorming, feel free to reach out to us and we will make ourselves available to you. And we hope to see you guys in the next session. And so just also to just plug as well too, there's a bunch of us that will be presenting here. And so again, if you don't see me next time, there will be someone else to join that will just take us away from here. So don't be alarmed if you start seeing different here as well too. But yeah, we'll be rocking out with you every now and then. And so you'll get to see Mindy and I pop up. Yeah.
But Pickles always will be there.
No.
Pickles will always be there.
He's your standing.
She's your constant. She's your North Star. Yes. Thanks,
all right,
everybody.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you, Christiana. Thank you, Mindy. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this California Housing Community Development session, uncoordinated entry and the cohort 1. We will be doing more sessions. Please check that survey as it pops up as you exit. We will be using that information for future sessions. Thank you very much and have a great day.